Let's transition now to the topic that's hard for a lot of people to consider, and that is death. Even sometimes Christians struggle with this. They're afraid to die. I have a question from a girl named Melanie from my Facebook page. She said, even though I'm a believer, I'm afraid to die. How should I view death as a Christian? I'm afraid of that moment when I pass from life to death. And then another person named Terry asks, could you please talk about the topic of soul sleep and what happens when you die? Do you go immediately to the Lord? So let's just look at this for a moment, Randy. Okay, non-believer, they die. What happens to them?
Okay, first with that one question, let me just say this. Then in Hebrews 2 it says, since the children have flesh and blood, Christ too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might destroy him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. That's right. And that is a bondage, the fear of death. And Christ came to deliver us from the ultimate consequences of death, that is, of sin, and the death it brings, of eternal separation from God, so that knowing now that we will spend eternity with Christ, we can say to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. It is better by far, Paul says in Philippians, to depart and be with Christ. So I think that that perspective on death is a huge one. What was the second question?
Well, okay, that's a believer. A believer dies, they go into the presence of the Lord. What happens to the non-believer when they die?
The non-believer dies, and immediately, and we see this in Luke 16 with the story of the rich man and Lazarus. The unbeliever dies.
That's a true story, not
true
a parable.
True story.
Right.
This rich man dies, and he immediately is suffering the fires of hell.
Yeah.
And immediately Lazarus dies, and he is with the people of God that's in the bosom of Abraham. He is with Abraham at that point. And it appears that it's only after the resurrection of Christ that people who are in this paradise that is called Abraham's bosom are then taken directly in the very presence of God because of the redemptive work of Christ. But when the believer dies, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. When the unbeliever dies, it's to be in hell.